Question number 2, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister responsible for Housing New Zealand Corporation. Does he accept the coroner's finding that the Housing New Zealand home in which Emma-Lita Bourne lived may have contributed to the pneumonia-like illness that Emma-Lita was suffering from at the time of her death?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, first of all, I'd like to extend my sympathies to the family of Emma-Lita Bourne. If there were steps that could have been taken to prevent this tragedy, I'm sure all concerned would have taken them. I accept the coroner's actual statements on the matter. Quote, "It is entirely possible a condition of the house had contributed to the pneumonia-like illness that Emma-Lita was suffering at the time of her death. And again, whether the cold living conditions of the house became a contributing factor to the circumstances of Emma-Lita's death cannot be excluded." The coroner also commented on the unusual medical aspects of this tragic death.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How does the Minister reconcile Nick Smith's statement that there's nothing new about people dying from pneumonia in winter and the government can't do anything about it, with Housing New Zealand's admission it failed Emma-Lita and the coroner's ruling that her house could have contributed to her death?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I don't accept the member's version of Dr Smith's statement, taken quite out of context. Mr Speaker, with respect to the other issues the member raises, Housing New Zealand has demonstrated they took a number of steps to improve the condition of this house, as they have spent hundreds of millions on other houses. It does indicate, though, that further change is required in our state housing system to ensure that we do have a wide range of suitable and appropriate standard housing available to New Zealanders who need it.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Well, does the Minister then agree with Nick Smith when he gave up and said that there's nothing that government can do to stop people dying from state houses, when Soisa Tovo's family and his doctors begged Housing New Zealand to move his family into a warmer, drier home to help prevent his tragic death?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I disagree with both the assertions, that is about what Dr Smith said and about what actions were taken around the Tova family. But again, it underlines, I think, as the member may now understand, that to the extent that housing has an influence on the health of these families, then we must change the state housing system, which has left us, despite hundreds of millions of dollars of expenditure, with houses that are still not up to the standard required.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Does the Minister agree with Duncan Garner that Nick Smith saying that it's normal for people like Emma-Lita and father of 6, Soisa Tovo, to die in winter is a callous statement and amounts to neglect?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, it's not what the Minister said. And if Duncan Garner described it that way, then he was incorrect. However, we're used to misrepresentation from that member.
That's right.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Will the Minister commit today to ensuring that all Housing New Zealand homes which cannot be fully insulated, like Emma-Lita's, are fitted with carpet, with thermal curtains and dehumidifiers now, this winter, to help prevent further deaths like Emma-Lita's?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I certainly can commit to all public services involved with these families taking the steps they ought to take to prevent as tragic an outcome as a death. And I might say in the case of the family the member is referring to, there are a range of issues of which housing was just one, which suggests that we could have done, the government could have done, the community could have done a better job to support the health of that family. But I can't, of course, make impractical undertakings about everything being done right now when we're dealing with housing stock with an accumulation of 60 or 70 years of problems, partly because of points of view taken by that minister that no house can be sold or redeveloped.
Point of order.
Point of order, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to table an unpublished written question showing Housing New Zealand does not supply dehumidifiers to state homes.
Sorry, can I just understand what leave is being sought for?
It's leave to table an unpublished written answer to a written question that I have received that Housing New Zealand does not supply dehumidifiers to state houses.
It's unusual, but on the basis the House can make the decision, I'll put the leave. Leave is sought to table this particular, at this stage, unpublished written question. Is there any objection to that question being tabled? Whereas supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Point of order, sir.
Order. Further point of order, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to table the answer to as yet unpublished answer to a written question showing Housing New Zealand installs curtains after the tenant has left.
Order. I'm not going to put the leave. That has a matter that's been raised once before. Again, the members using the member will resume to see. The members trying to use the point of order simply to reinforce a political point. That's not what it's designed for. The tabling of documents is about further informing members. Members will have that information when it's published after the 3 days. Further supplementary. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
How many tenants, like Soisa Tovo, have requested a transfer to a healthier home on their doctor's orders but are still living in a cold, damp, unhealthy state house? And if he doesn't know, why doesn't he know?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'd have to go and get that information. The Housing New Zealand has ways of collating its data. We can't always tell you exactly the reason why a tenant asks for a transfer, but I might say we would have more choices about houses to transfer them if we weren't fighting a legacy of green-type policies that prevent the growth and development of a city like Auckland, enabling more houses faster on the ground so that these families have somewhere to move to. It's the green-type policies are a big part of the problem here.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Smirking, Bill English.
Order. Order. The member's going to have the opportunity. Order. The member now will just ask her supplementary
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the government have any responsibility for ensuring that people with respiratory illnesses, like Emma-Lita or Mr Tovo, aren't forced to sleep in bedrooms with vinyl tiles stuck to uninsulated concrete floors, with mould dripping down the walls? Or does he agree with Dr Nick Smith that their deaths are simply nothing new?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, again, I don't agree with the member's characterisation of Dr Smith's statements. Yes, of course, the government does have some responsibility, as do the tenants, but the government is taking the responsibility very seriously. We are setting out for a generational renewal of the state housing stock, and we're trying to cast off the ridiculous policies that party has supported that said no state house can be sold because the one built in the 1950s to the 1950s standards are what we need now. That is a ridiculous position, and we will continue to push for change.
Order. I apologise to the Minister.
Mr Speaker, with respect, this is the second answer that Minister has given, and with the greatest respect, it'll be patently obvious to everybody that the Greens have not been in government the last 7 or 6.5 years. So why is he persisting and being allowed to get away with that answer?
Order. He didn't say that the Greens are getting in government. I think the words he used was that the Greens had supported a party that was in government, as I recall. Further supplementary. Question number 3, Andrew Little.